Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to this webinar on how to score 760. It's a score that you guys, many of you, want to get to, and so in this webinar, I'm going to talk about what does it take to get to a score of 700, 740, 750, 760. How do you identify where you need to work on? How do you create those hyper-specific improvement plans, and then how do you figure out whether those plans are working? But first things first, let me just talk a bit about myself. My name is Rajat Sadana. I'm one of the co-founders of eGMAT, and I'm going to be your main host today. Supporting me in this webinar is Atreya, who's a subject matter expert as well as a GMAT strategy expert at eGMAT, and he's going to be your co-host. I also want to thank GMAT Club for allowing us to host this session, and I hope you guys find this useful. Okay. Um, First of all, can you guys hear me clearly? And if you can hear me clearly, then type in yes, and so that uh, I can then talk about and carry on with the session. Let me actually get my phone as well so that I can also see the session and get this, because I'm not getting your comments over here. All right. I can see that you guys can hear me clearly. That's wonderful. Ah, perfect. So let's talk about your target GMAT score. Uh, what is your target GMAT score? Let's get some data from the audience over here. I'm going to wait about 30 to 40 seconds. I know there's a slight delay from when I ask a question to when you guys respond. So yeah, what is your target GMAT score? 760, 750. Akshay says 730. Moinak says 740. All right, that's good. I have 780s, 750s over here. That's wonderful. Okay, so what I'm gonna share on the next screen is a bit depressing, but I don't want you to get depressed. The purpose of this session is to kind of make sure that you guys get to the score, but at the same time, I want to make sure that I share the facts with you. So essentially, getting to a score of higher than 700 is actually extremely hard, and I can tell you this because statistically only 10% of the folks make it, but 70 to 80% of the people want it, but only 10% of the folks make it. And essentially, this is a quote that I somehow I heard this when I was in sixth grade. It was in my English textbook. It says, for every one tree that bears fruit, there are 1,000 others that wither away. The world of GMAT prep is essentially like that. Actually, nature essentially is like that, and that's kind of how GMAT prep, unfortunately, today is. And but if you think about what humans have done, and they've always tinkered with nature, and we now have a process where we sow seeds, and we have a much higher certainty with regards to whether we actually get a plant and then a tree. Similarly, this session is a lot about how can you not belong to this particular group versus this. So in this session, I'm going to talk about how you can increase that likelihood of scoring 700 or higher from that 10% to that 80%. Why? Because the GMAT's a standardized exam, and getting to that score is fairly predictable. Okay, so we're going to really look at some behaviors, some metrics, and some traits, your traits that that are essential if you want to increase that likelihood from that 10% to this 80%. Okay, so this is what this session is about. How do you go from here to here? Okay, so there are 5 things at a very high level. Getting to that 700 plus score requires that you do many things right, and just to really neatly categorize those 30 to 40 things, I put them in 5 different buckets over here. The first bucket is about having the right attitude, the right approach towards your GMAT preparation. I can tell you about 30 to 40% of the people kind of get out of the competition right here, where they have the wrong approach towards GMAT preparation. I'm going to talk about what that right approach needs to be. Even when you have the right attitude, the right approach, or the correct approach towards your GMAT preparation, you still need to learn the right methods or the correct methods or eGMAT. Just learning those methods is not enough. You've also got to cement that learning. You've got to make sure that, because remember, when you get to that 700 plus score, it's about achieving a certain ability level. It's about getting better than others. And to get better than others, you've got to make sure that just you don't just know the methods, you actually are you're better than others at applying those methods. And there's this phase called cementing that you have to go through. And then even when you do that, 740 requires that you actually achieve that 90th percentile ability in various aspects of the GMAT. And to do that, you oftentimes have to create what we call as hyper-specific improvement plans. We're going to and then finally be test ready. Again, each one of these is a bucket. There are about 8 to 10 failure modes in each one of them. And again, this may seem a lot, this may seem scary, but I can tell you, I'm telling you the facts, and I'm going to share some data around this. Now, given the fact that this session is about 70, 75 minutes, my focus is going to be on 1, 2, and 4. I'm not going to focus as much on 3 and 5, and for the paucity of time. And again, this is too much information otherwise, that if I focus on everything. And again, even in 1, 3, and 4, I'm going to focus on certain selective things. I'm going to talk about giving you the principles, solve a question or so during this time. We also have another GMAT strategy session in which we're going to go into more details around this. In many ways, that session is a continuation. We talk about study plans and other things. And so if you like the session, I'd say attend that session as well. It'll just, take that learning on how to ace the GMAT to that next level. Okay. But the thing which is there is to get to that score of 700 or higher, you need to do all of that. Okay. But then the question really is, you've heard probably other experts who come in and talk about and say, hey, we can help you get to that score of 700 or higher. And they say, this is fairly simple. So how do you know that what I'm going to talk about works? And to really just prove my point, I'm going to share some facts and facts and stats. At eGMAT, we are big on data. In fact, we are huge on data. If I can propose something and everyone in the company can refute it if they actually present data to me, and we give access to data to everyone in the company, even those who just joined this month. So how do you know this works? So let's talk about 700 plus scores. And just to keep things simple, I've looked at that one threshold of 700 plus. Why? Because once you hit that 700 plus, then achieving that 730, 740 is very doable. It shows that you have the necessary traits to achieve that 730, 740 or that 760 score. So we're going to look at data from 2021, which is from the 1st of January to the 31st of May over here. And when you think about how many 700 plus scores have been reported on GMAT Club, you'd find that based on my estimate, about 190 odd scores have been reported. 150 of them have been reported by 11 GC partners, and the other 40 have been reported by people who've done self-prep. Now, this is a precise number. You can go to the GMAT Club's review section. You can look at this. This is something which is my estimate, but my guess is this is within 10% or so. So when you think about this, when I looked at this first of all tells you how difficult this is. Now, not every student who scores a 700 reports it, but just the sheer number tells you that it's not thousands of scores that have been reported in the last 5 months or so. Okay. Now, when we say 11 GC partners, who are those 11 GC partners? There are the 11 GC partners, and the reason you see 12 is because I think these two right now are the same company over here. So that's kind of what makes it 11. But even among those 11 GC partners or GMAT Club partners, things are not equal over here. So let's kind of focus on those 150, 700 plus scores. Actually, about 111 out of those 150 belong to two companies, eGMAT and Target Test Prep, and 39 of those 700 plus scores have are been reported by all of these. In fact, if you take Crackbubble is the only other company whose students have reported more than 10 700 plus scores. Every other company, I think, has reported fewer than this. So the reason why I'm saying that this is really important is to really focus on how incredibly difficult it is to get to that score of 700, and also I personally have a lot of respect for people who get there. And again, in this webinar, we're going to talk about what is it that you need to do to make sure that you come into that bracket. Again, the real number is, I'd say, this multiplied by 6 to 7, because not everyone who actually scores 700 reports that score. I can tell you, I know this for our students overall, and I'm sure this is true for other test prep companies as well. Okay. So how do you get to that 80%? So let's talk about these 5 things, and we're going to start with the right approach. Okay. Why? Because if you falter at the right approach, these are all, each one of these is in a sequential order. You don't do one thing at the top. Even if you do the next thing, well, it's not going to matter. And for us, we are, as a company, on a mission to really figure out how do you increase that to 80%. We're not there yet at 80%. I'll tell you that we're there at about 50 to 60% right now. And if you want to see how we are approaching this problem, we talked briefly about this in our Scholarium 2.0 launch. Athreya, you can share the recording for this, and if you watch the first 10 minutes, you're going to look at how we're approaching this problem. What is it that we're doing to hit that number to 80%? Okay, so let's start with point number 1, the right approach. Now, the right approach over here starts with the right attitude. And one thing that I want to tell you is acing the GMAT is all first and foremost about the right attitude. And if I want you guys to remember one thing, that is that acing the GMAT is about building ability. And the reason why I'm saying that is because when people think about acing the GMAT, they focus on timing, they focus on exam strategy right from the first day. They focus on, hey, how am I going to approach a mock test, and how am I going to approach questions on the real GMAT? How am I going to build the stamina to sustain myself through a 3-hour, 6-minute test? These things are important, but when it comes to comparative importance with regards to building ability, this is 80, and all of these things combined are 20. And by the way, if you don't do that 80, this 20 is irrelevant. You can do all of this 20, you're not going to get anywhere. If you do that 80, which is building ability, you will truly get there. Now, what I'm going to show on the next slides, a few of you have probably seen this before, but it's really important to set the foundation for the approach towards the GMAT. So bear with me for another 10 minutes if you've seen this before. Okay. So 2 terms over here, accuracy and ability. And people often confuse between these 2 terms. What is accuracy? When you take a 10-question quiz, you get 8 out of those 10 questions right. You say my accuracy is 80%. It's the percentage of questions that you got correct, regardless of the difficulty level of that question served on that quiz. In many ways, accuracy is an absolute measure, which means that when you say my accuracy is 80%, you're not comparing yourself to others. Okay, it's an absolute measure. You're in a quiz, you can have an accuracy of 80%. Your rank or your ability might still be 50th percentile. Why? Because if everyone who takes the quiz, if half the people who take the quiz scored 8 out of 10 or more correct. Okay, so accuracy and absolute measure has no comparative notion to it. Ability is a comparative measure. It really is a metric which says how good you are compared to others. So when you say you need an ability of 90th percentile, so what you're really saying is, I want to be better than 90% of all GMAT test takers. Score of 700 is approximately 90th percentile, or 88th percentile to be precise. And so what you're really saying is, of all the GMAT test takers, and about 200,000 of them who take the test every year, I need to be better than 90% of those. So the 10% of GMAT test takers who can be at the same level or better than you. Okay, so let's kind of look at how the GMAT works, how the GMAT determines your ability, because that score out of 800 is essentially an ability score. Okay, so to do that, I'm going to talk about how an adaptive test test works, and the GMAT follows the same principle. It doesn't. Even though it follows the same principle, it does not follow the exact same method. But if you understand this principle, you'll have a really good understanding of how the GMAT works. Now, I see a couple of questions here about MBAs, which schools should I apply to, what score, and all of that. I'd be happy to answer those questions towards the end. But if you would refrain from asking such questions during the webinar, it'll make sure that this is worth your time. And you'd get a good understanding of the GMAT, and then towards the end, you'll get really good answers to the questions that you're asking. Okay, so let's talk about an adaptive test algorithm over here. So what we have on the x-axis is progress within the test, question number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. What we have on the y-axis is difficulty level of questions. So the higher you go on the y-axis, the more difficult a question becomes. We have two students here. We call them case 1 and case 2. Student 1 or case 1 gets the first question, median difficulty level. Typically, the first question is a median difficulty level. Gets that right. He gets the second question, which is of a higher difficulty level. He gets that right as well. You can really see the second question, the position of the second question is higher than the position of the first question on the y-axis. So we're going higher. Remember, y-axis was your difficulty level axis. Then he gets a third question, which was even more challenging, and he gets that wrong. He gets the fourth question, whose difficulty level, and you can see this over here, is between question number, that of difficulty level of 2 and 3. How do you do that? You kind of draw a straight line, then you can see that this is where the fourth question is between 3 and 2 over here. So he gets that right. Then he gets the fifth question, he gets that wrong. Now remember, this is your median difficulty level or the average difficulty level line. Then let's talk about student 2 or case 2. Student 2 gets the first question, median difficulty level, gets that wrong, gets the second question, which is easier, gets that right, gets a third question, which is a bit more challenging, makes a mistake on that, gets the fourth question, which is easier, gets that right, and gets the fifth question right as well. Now, if I were to ask you who is doing better out of students 1 and 2, it's very, very clear that student 1's doing better. Why? Because he has answered more difficult questions correctly. Even though both these students have an accuracy of 60%, so in terms of that absolute number that accuracy represents, it's 60%, but because student 1 has answered more difficult questions correctly, his score actually is going to be considerably higher than that of student 2. Okay. Just another thing that I want you to point out is that student 1 got 5 questions. Each one of them was either at the average difficulty level, which is kind of the first question, or above the average difficulty level. And this is something which is really important to note. In fact, I mean, the test did not even give for student 2, that wasn't the case. He only got one question that was at the average difficulty level. That was the beginning question. Post that, the test did not even give student 2 the opportunity to answer difficult questions. Why? Because the student hadn't proven to the test that he could solve difficult questions. So again, bottom line, identical accuracy, very, very different scores over here. So what does it mean when it comes to acing the GMAT? What it means is that you have to overcome 2 challenges to ace the GMAT. One is to make sure that this test serves difficult questions to you. On the test, you have this question picking algorithm that decides what difficulty level of questions should be served to you. You've got to make sure that the test serves those difficult questions. Why? Because difficult questions allow you to get 3 times as many points as an easy question does. Okay. Second thing is, to continue to get difficult questions, you've got to answer a majority of them correctly. Otherwise, the test lowers that difficulty level. So it's kind of a self-reinforcement loop in many ways. So essentially, to answer those questions correctly, you need to have the ability, and which is why I really say your GMAT score is governed by your ability to answer difficult questions correctly. Okay. So again, these things are important. But secondary, this thing is 80%. And this is how you ought to study. I'm going to really talk about people who don't understand this, how their attitude towards the test takes them towards that path of failure. Okay. Now that was anecdotally over here. This is some statistical data. And for those of you who don't know, in 2018, prior to middle of 2018, the GMAT was actually an even longer format. And the official GMAT They used to have rather than the official GMAT marks, they used to have the GMAT prep application, and that GMAT prep application was absolutely phenomenal. They've actually gone a step back with the official GMAT marks now. It was phenomenal because it allowed us to study how the GMAT works, and it allowed us to really figure out, what does it actually test. That adaptive test algorithm is an outcome of those studies that are done by us, and some of them were done by GMAT Club as well. So what you see over here is two students, verbal section attempts of two students, and at that time, when I said the test was longer, your verbal section had 41 questions, and the red rectangles they are those rectangles where students have made mistakes. Okay, so what you see is when you look at these two students, if you compare questions 11 to 41, you're going to find that both these students have made 9 mistakes between question numbers 11 and 41. These mistakes are kind of evenly spaced, more or less. You can't give or take between any student here. The only exception here is that this guy has made these 2 additional mistakes in this case. Now, if you were to purely look at these two students from a lens of accuracy, you would find that that essentially their score should be very similar, 9 versus 11 mistakes. But the GMAT doesn't look at this. The GMAT looks deeper. So on the actual test, student 1, this guy over here who got 9 mistakes, his rank on the verbal section was 97th percentile. Student 2, his rank was 65th percentile. So in other words, what the test told student 1 is, you are among the top 6,000 test takers worldwide when it comes to the GMAT verbal section. What the test told student 2 is, you are among the top 70,000 test takers. Or there are 70,000 test takers who are at the same level or better than you. Okay. A lot of people look at this chart and say, man, this is messed up. This means I make 2 mistakes and I essentially get dropped from that 97th percentile to that 65th percentile. I've got to be really, really, really careful over there. Some people even go as far to really say, I've got to get each of the first 10 questions correct. Those are 2 inferences which kind of seem like stuff that you take out of an observation and draw and make it an inference and take forward. Those are 2 incorrect inferences. If you were to take those 2 inferences, you would actually be wrong about the test. And which is where knowing that principle is really important. So we're going to look at student 2. Okay, over there, the guy who got the first 2 questions wrong. Got the first question, median difficulty level, he got that wrong. Got the second question, which is the 35th percentile level, which means this is a question that but 70% of the people answer that question correctly. He still got that wrong. Got the third question, which is a 15th percentile level. Now, if you are an individual, you really say, okay, someone who's answered a 50th percentile question wrong, a 35th percentile question wrong, clearly that guy is not going to be a 90th percentile guy. That likelihood, the joint probability of you answering a 50th percentile or a 90th percentile guy answering a 50th percentile, which is this question, and a 35th percentile question wrong, one after the other, is less than 1 in 10,000. So clearly, at this point, this guy is saying, this guy's not super smart. Let me just serve him an easy question. Remember, the first challenge was to get difficult questions served to you. So it gets a 15 percentile question, gets that right. 20th percentile question, gets that right. 25th percentile question. 35th percentile question, 45th percentile question. And so essentially the difficulty level increases slowly for him. Student 1, who got the first 10 questions correct, started getting 90th percentile questions, or hard questions as we call them on the GMAT, right from the 5th or 6th question onwards. And he continued to answer those correctly. Okay. So there's a lot more difference between them. So when you think about the test, it doesn't care about these red blocks over here. It actually cares about these ability scores. So these 2 students, when you look at them through the lens of ability, the test was measuring their ability in sentence correction, critical reasoning, and reading comprehension. And these abilities were measured independently. And when you look at these students through the lens of ability, you're going to find that they're really very different. Student 1 is at the 95th percentile when it comes to sentence correction, whereas student 2 is at an 81st percentile. And that difference accentuates when you look at critical reasoning or reading comprehension abilities overall. So when I say the GMAT test of ability, it truly is it's a numerical number. It's not just a principle. You get that mathematical form and ability when you inability scores when you take the test. Okay. Again, a GMAT score is governed by your ability to answer difficult questions correctly. Now, if you go to GMAT Club Share GMAT Experience section, you'd see a student who scored 760, incredibly smart guy. And he's put in a post which is saying, hey, here is my ESR. I've answered 3 questions incorrectly. I think the guy has a V45 or a V46. So it's an incredibly smart guy. And what he's trying to achieve is to say, okay, how many questions can you get wrong if you want to get a V45? And he says you can make 3 mistakes and still get a V45. Now, perfectly good observation. The problem really is I also have an ESR where someone's gotten 3 questions wrong and that person has a V32. So again, when you're thinking about the GMAT, accuracy is the absolute wrong metric. And a lot of people, not just smart students, but even experts, focus on accuracy as a measure. Don't do that. Focus on ability. Focus on measuring your ability. Okay. So what abilities does the GMAT measure? So when you think about your GMAT score, it is an ability score. It's out of 800. And the score of out of 800 is dependent on 2 abilities, your verbal ability and your quant ability. Your verbal ability is dependent on 3 subsectional abilities. Let's call them V1, which is in sentence correction, V2 in critical reasoning, and V3 in reading comprehension. And the quant score is dependent on 2 abilities, Q1, which is arithmetic, and Q2 versus which is algebra and geometry. Okay, and essentially the question that you have to ask yourself is, how do you figure out which ability score should you aim for? So a bit more insight in this. On the official test, you have these 5 ability ranges. The one on the top, they are running independently, which means the difficulty level of questions served to you in critical reasoning do not depend or depend very little on how you did in sentence correction or how you did in critical reason or reading comprehension. I'm sorry. Okay. So think of these as 5 independent subsections. We call them subsections. Why? Because these are sections and this is your GMAT. So each one of these subsectional abilities is calculated independently. And based on the verbal abilities, you get this verbal score. Based on the quant abilities, you get these quant scores. By the way, any combination of these ability scores can predict that score out of 800 with about 99.75% accuracy. 99.75%. If you run an regression across ability scores, and we have upwards of 1,000 ESRs in our repository, you run that regression, you're going to get the R square as 99.75. Okay. Kostub says, how to deal with attempts versus accuracy. So Kostub, if you can elaborate your question, I'd be happy to answer that over here. So the thing which is there is when you think about scoring that 740, you've got to ask this question: what ability scores am I aiming for in these 5 subsections? And the answer to this is different for everyone. Now, we're not going to look at how do you optimize which ability scores you should look at depending on your strengths, depending on your weaknesses. In our weekend session, we're going to take a few case studies over there. And if you want to attend that, if you want to figure out how do you build that optimal study plan, how do you figure out how many months you need, or even do you even need a month to prepare for the GMAT, then join that strategy session. And then we're going to take some case studies over there. And Atre, if you can share that link, that'd be great. Okay. So again, just to finish this part, acing the GMAT is about building ability. Now, on the GMAT, you can make mistakes. Let me also tell you that. Here's a student who went from an extremely low V17 to a V40, and you can see that V40 score is composed of these 3 ability scores: critical reasoning, reading comprehension, and sentence correction ability scores. V40 is 91st percentile ability. Okay. Now, this guy made mistakes. This is, again, a screenshot from his ESR. And what you can see is he made mistakes, but he made mistakes only when questions got more challenging. And you can also download this. This guy was actually generous enough to share his ESR with us and also on GMAT Club. So you can download this as well. But the thing that I wanted to make sure is you don't have to be perfect. This guy had about 8 to 9 mistakes in his entire attempt, and he could still get a 91st percentile as long as you make mistakes on difficult questions. What's criminal is making mistakes on medium or easy questions over here. Okay, and this is really, really important. Why? Because the GMAT It's not only an extremely fair test, it's also a very forgiving test, as long as you don't commit harakari. Okay, which is very different from some of the other non-adaptive tests where you make a careless mistake here or there, and they're purely based on accuracy, and someone doesn't make a careless mistake means that it's very difficult for you to come back. On the GMAT, it is possible for you to come back if you have the ability and if you apply yourself. Okay, so then when people look at this, they have some key questions. First of all is, do the first 10 questions matter? That's the first question I get, and I get this again and again. The second thing is, should I approach the first 10 questions differently from how I approach the rest of the test? And the third thing is, should I spend more time on the first 10? I mean, it seems they're important, so I should spend more time. The answer is yes, they are more important. Should you approach them differently? Absolutely not. Why? Because if you don't have the ability, you can spend the entire 66 minutes, 65 minutes on the first 10. It's not going to matter. Okay. Should you spend more time? No. Why? Because hey, if you have the ability, again, it's not going to matter. You should just approach the first 10 in a standard fashion. And let me explain these three answers with some data. So, but the takeaway that I want you to have is, do not fret about the first 10, even though they seem to matter slightly more, but it doesn't mean you should focus a lot on the first 10. You should worry about, man, I can't give up on any question in the first 10. You can make mistakes on the first 10 as long as you make mistakes on a question that is difficult, which, by the way, if you have high ability, the only way you're going to make mistake on a question is if that question is difficult. And let me, again, remember this. You can make mistakes as long as you make them on hard questions. Okay, so let's take an example. You're going to take Melissa as a student. Her ability is 90th percentile. Let me just explain what that 90th percentile ability means. If you say my ability in SC, CR, or RC is 90th percentile. Okay, what it means is, and here's a table that I'm going to show, which is the first column is difficulty level, the second is accuracy, and the third is the probability of incorrect. So probability of incorrect essentially comes from accuracy. So it's 1 minus the accuracy is the probability of incorrect questions. So if someone has a 90th percentile ability going into the test in a certain subsection, then for medium level questions, their accuracy is 90%. Why? If they don't hit that accuracy, it's going to be very difficult for them to achieve 90th percentile ability, which means the likelihood that you're going to solve a medium question wrong is about 10%. The likelihood that you're going to solve a medium hard question wrong is about 20%. Okay, and the likelihood that you're going to solve a hard question wrong is about 35%. These are the metrics that go into building or proving that prior to even starting the test, you have 90th percentile ability in a particular subsection. Okay, so what does this mean? This means that, hey, in the first 10, if you have medium and medium hard, you're not going to make mistakes. Why? Because this is how you're coming in. I mean, your likelihood of answering those is correctly is 90%. Your likelihood of making 2 mistakes is less than 1 in 100. 0.1 into 0.1 is 0.01. Right? And the other thing is, hey, the test allows you to come back. All right. And the test allows you to make mistakes on hard questions. That's okay. Why? Because even the smartest folks make mistakes on hard questions. Their accuracy is around that 65th to 70th percent on hard questions. Now, remember, we're talking about accuracy, but we're comparing accuracy on items that are comparable. Hard questions are comparable to other hard questions, medium hard are comparable to other medium hard, and medium are comparable to other medium. So that's really important. So when it comes to the GMAT, don't worry about the first 10, worry about building that accuracy. So focus on building accuracy. Don't approach the test any differently. You should focus on doing well in practice. You should focus on doing well on the test as well. Okay. Now, if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, you can click on the link that Atre is going to share. About 18,500 students who connected with me on LinkedIn, and typically, if you want to connect with a student at a certain B school, you'd find that you can connect to that student through my LinkedIn. Also, we post about 5 articles which talk about the best practices for GMAT prep, what's going on in the MBA world, and so on and so forth. So you kind of keep yourself updated as well. Okay, so let's talk about the second piece now, which is how do you build ability. So the first piece was you've got to have that right attitude. The second piece is, I'm sorry, how do you build ability? Because building ability is the key to scoring that score. Now, the advice that I'm going to give you is going to be slightly different than what you've heard in the past. So again, I'm going to share some data to make sure that you believe me. Um, so when you think about GMAT Club started the verified reviews policy in October of 2015, which means that every review that was posted was either verified using a score report link, which is through MBA.com. You couldn't even upload a PDF. You had to provide a score report link, or you had to be a member on GMAT Club for upwards of 2 years, or you had to be a super active member on GMAT Club, which means you should be doing 25, at least 25. I think that number is 35 now, logical posts. And since GMAT Club introduced a verified reviews policy, we've actually produced more reviews than the next four top partners. In fact, we've produced more reviews than all of them combined. So the thing that I'm trying to say is what we do seems to work for many people. It doesn't work for a few people, but it seems to work for a majority of folks over here. Now, the process that I'm going to talk about is something that needs to be done for each of the subsections, at least where you need help, where you're not naturally strong. Now, remember, on the GMAT, you have 5 subsections. You have 2 in quant and 3 in verbal. Each of these subsections is independent. Okay. Each subsection has an equal weight. A lot of people think, man, RC is more, has a higher weight than SC or CR. No, it doesn't. We've done the simulations. We've done the math. It doesn't. And in fact, even if the GMAC comes and tell me it does, I can show the math to them and say, prove me wrong. And I hate to be wrong as a former algorithm designer and as a proud engineer. I pride myself on being mathematically correct. And essentially, 3 things here. Each subsection is independent. Each subsection has an identical weight. And you need to have a target ability in each subsection. Another thing that I want to tell you is you don't need to excel in each subsection to get a 700. Okay, you can excel in some and be above average in others, and that's kind of what we'll talk about in the GMAT strategy session. We actually have an AI-driven tool that finds that optimal set of abilities for you across these subsections. But the thing that I want to make sure that I emphasize on is that this process of building ability is identical. You've got to repeat that for every subsection. And that's very, very important. A lot of people do that well for one subsection. They don't do it well for the other just because they get lazy, they get tired. But I want to make sure that you understand this. You've got to do this again and again. And which is why it's difficult. I mean, I respect people who get to that score of 700 or higher. Why? Because this is not rocket science, but this is a lot of persistence. This is a lot of diligence. And the fact that you get a 700, 730, 740 means you're showing that diligence despite working full time. Okay. So we're going to focus on just one subsection, and the same thing has to be repeated across other subsections. And I'm going to, given the paucity of time, I'm going to kind of slightly rush through this over here. Now, in each subsection, you have to go through what we call as the 3 stages of learning. And this is a model that we follow within eGMAT. Every student has to go through these 3 stages of learning. We have independent learning platforms in technology built for these 3 stages of learning. We have metrics, we have quiz types that we follow. And when we say that, 10% of the people get to that 700 plus score, but we can increase that probability to 80%. It is when people hit these metrics across these 3 stages, there's 80% likelihood. And we've seen that happen across thousands of students that they're going to hit that score. Okay, so what are these 3 stages of learning? The first and the foremost stage, especially for people who are starting at a low ability score in any subsection, is you've got to spend dedicated time on learning the core concepts that are tested and developing and building sustainable methods to answer these questions. Okay. But 60% of your time in that subsection needs to be spent over here. Now, just learning those methods and concepts is not enough. You also need to cement those methods. A lot of people just say, I'm going to read the theory and I'm going to go start taking mocks or practicing hard questions. No, that is a recipe for failure. You've got to go through this stage called cementing stage. It's a small stage. It takes about 2 days for most subsections, especially if you've done this correctly. But if you don't do that stage, you get stuck. And once you've done this second stage over here, then you can start taking mocks. Then you can refine to perfection. Then you can hit that 90th percentile ability. And again, the strategies that you follow during stage 1 are different from the strategies. When I say strategies, the approach that you follow during stage one is very different from the approach that you follow during stage two. Is completely different from the approach that you'll follow during stage three over here. So how does your ability improve across these stages? And again, remember, there are these three stages. So if you do these stages well, and we're going to really look at what happens if you don't do these stages well. Why? Because we have enough data across both. Not every eGMAT is successful. So we also know what people do when they fail. Okay. If you do stage one well, you could land anywhere between 50th to 70th percentile ability. That's something that we've seen that happen again and again. People who go through our SC course do it in a single go, or do it not without, with kind of a couple of days of breaks at the most, and have good metrics in a concept, application, and practice files. They hit between 50th and 70th percentile ability. Then when you do cementing methods, if you do cementing stage properly, okay, you hit between 70th to 85th percentile. And then after that, when you do test readiness, you could be anywhere from that 85th to 97th percentile. This is if you do it well. Now, here's the beauty of this. Stage one is where a majority of people go out. Why? Because, man, if you're not diligent, this is where you're going to come out. It's going to show up over here. As I said, stage one is the longest overall. But if you do the stage one well, and if you follow the cementing process, there's an 80% chance that you will do cementing well. And if you do cementing well, there is again an 80% chance that you will do this. And by the way, if you are diligent, if you work with our LMP programs, that percentage goes to 90-90 and overall. Now, what if you don't do this well? You'd be stuck at 20th to 40th percentile ability, but that's not the kicker. The kicker is, no matter how much you practice, you're going to be hard pressed to go beyond 65th. Very few people even hit that 65th percentile ability. Okay. All right. So 60 to 70% of the people who fail to get to that 700 plus score, the reason why they fail is because they fail over here. And this is the stage where you spend most of your time that you spend for a subsection. This is the stage where you need the most feedback. For SC, for example, we provide you 90 personalized points of feedback. For CR, but 94 or so to ensure that you do stage one well. Okay. So why do people falter in stage one? Okay. There are 4 key buckets of people faltering in stage one. Remember, these were the 5 hierarchical things that I talked about. This is just one of those bullet points. And in that, you have 4, again, failure modes. The first is they don't follow the right methods. There are 2 things that happen over here. One is that as they're learning the concepts, people worry about timing. They just really say, man, I'm learning this new method. It seems to take me 3.5 minutes to be able to solve this SC question. I have to worry about so many things. I'm worried. I only have 1.5 minutes on the test. They don't recognize they are in stage one. They just want to go take mocks. And when they do that, they don't learn the methods. They still learn the concepts, but they don't learn the methods. They don't learn the methods. Those methods are not sustainable. Now, what's compounded also by the fact is that a lot of people try and teach tricks. I saw a webinar recently happen where someone was telling me that, hey, in 85% of the passages, RC passages, the main point can be gotten from the first paragraph. Absolutely wrong. I can prove that. No, you can't get the main point from the first paragraph. Again, these are tricks. Tricks do not work on the GMAT. Okay, so you're worried about timing. Someone's there who's teaching you tricks to really say, hey, I'm going to save time. They get attracted to it, and it might work initially, but it doesn't work. And that's kind of where you see the difference in the results from test prep companies. The second piece is they don't believe that they have to spend that much time learning. Okay, they say, man, and they get what I call as, these are people who are trigger happy. I call them trigger happy people. Why? Because for them, spending time learning something is not as useful. They're just focused on practicing as many questions as possible. A lot of these people who come with this belief, they actually come from the CAT background, which is an Indian test. And on the CAT, which is not a test of ability, it's a test of accuracy. This works, but on the GMAT, this belief, this approach does not work. It actually is a recipe for failure. Okay, and these people who don't spend enough time in stage one They just spend 2 or 3 days on going through theory and they say, I'm going to practice, and get there. Don't do that. The third thing is, even when you're spending time, you've got to seek feedback. You've got to act upon feedback. Okay. What happens if you spend time but don't seek feedback or don't act upon feedback? You still have learning gaps. Our critical reasoning course has about 90 learning activities. A majority of the people, about 80% of the people, don't go through each of those learning activities perfectly in the first go, and which is where that feedback's really important. What that feedback tells you is that, hey, if you've gone through this argument type, which is two entities, and if you've scored 60%, you've got to revise this. There are certain gaps in your understanding. Let's fix those gaps right then and there. Those people don't worry about feedback. Why? Because many of them in many ways are also worried about finishing the course rather than excelling on the course. And essentially, as a result, what happens is that two entities gap remains. It actually comes up in evaluate, it comes up in strengthen, it comes up in weaken, and all of those pieces. And they make mistakes. Why? Because a two entities or a comparison architecture in an argument is a classic architecture. It repeats again and again. And if you have that logical gap there, it's going to be very difficult to fill it again. Okay. And then some people, again, those trigger happy people, actually just can't study one subsection at a time. And this again also comes from a bunch of advice that people really say, says you should study both quant and verbal, otherwise you would forget. No, it doesn't happen. If you follow the 3 stages of learning, you don't forget, especially after if you do cementing. Cementing, the whole name cementing by itself means that it cements that concept in your mind. So these people would study SC for 2 days, then go and say, man, let me just go study CR for 3 days, and then say, okay, I think I've done enough of CR, I've learned a bunch of things, let me just go study number properties. No, do not switch between subsections. There's a reason why there's a course architecture that's built a certain way. It's done in a progressive fashion. There's a reason why you have those evaluations. Okay. Actually, this piece is very, very classic over here. Sometimes people send us screenshots and say, hey, I have a doubt over here, and they'll send a screenshot of their entire window, and I'd see like 20 tabs open. I don't know how many of you are like those folks, but I've seen 20 tabs open over here. Imagine what you're doing. I mean, you have eGMAT.com, and we probably enable 2 or 3 tabs, even if you're toggling, but 20 tabs with 2 or 3 YouTube tabs and then some news tabs and all of that piece. If you want to study for the GMAT, train your brain. Those 2 hours or hour and a half, we don't ask for a lot, but we ask for diligent effort. Don't watch that YouTube video. Don't have this attitude that what harm can a 2-minute YouTube video do? No, do not do that, please. Because remember, you're trying to achieve excellence. By the way, none of this is essentially subject matter that I'm talking about. It's about human behavior. And which is why I'm telling you, I have incredible respect for people who do stage 1 well. Okay, so let's talk about methods. DJ says, what's the perfect environment for study? DJ is one of the GMAT mentors, one of the most successful mentors. The perfect environment is if you have an app which can allow you to really stop certain websites that you are prone to go to, then have that app installed, and then make sure that for that 1 hour you don't go to those apps. After that 1 hour, summarize what you've learned. And then if you want to spend those 5 minutes after that 1 hour, after you've summarized what you've learned, which means that 1 hour learning has cemented it in your mind, then that's fine. Okay. How long should you budget for the first part of learning of concepts? It depends on your starting ability and Joshua. So the GMAT strategy session that we'll have this Saturday, we'll go through different case studies, but depending on who you are, it could be anywhere between 15 to 45 hours. Okay, between 15 to 45. Again, there's a big range over there, which is where when someone asks this question, how long do I need to how long will I take to finish your course? My answer is, I don't know. It depends on who you are. It could take 6 months, or we have people who've done this in 14 days, and their starting abilities were different. It wasn't that one guy was smarter than the other. One was definitely more diligent than the other, but also the big difference was their starting abilities. Okay, so we've done this. We are kind of over here and learning the right methods over here. We're going to, and then this is the last piece that we have left. But let's kind of do briefly do but learning the right methods, and finish this to really talk about what is learning the right methods over here. And to do that, we're going to solve a critical reasoning question. And I'm going to give you guys uh, about a CR question. I'm going to give you about 3 minutes to solve that CR question. Here is a CR question. This is an official question. Atre, if you can share the link um, in the chat pod, that'd be great. Okay, here's the link to the question. And please don't post your responses here. Post those responses in in the question in the poll itself, so that we can get comparative stats. And then we're going to just briefly discuss this question in this case, and move forward. Okay, so 3 minutes to answer this question. And Atreya, in 3 minutes, if you could tell me the stats, that would be wonderful. I'm going to just mute myself, and I'll be back. All right. Atre, you can put me in there as well. Thank you. And if you can post the stats, if we have, I think we still have another 30 seconds before. Oh, we have, the timer just ran. So if you can post the stats, if that'd be great. In this case. So Nikita, put your response over there in the poll question, and Atre, if you can post the stats. And again, you can't send those to me on Teams. 60% of the answers, which was the most popular incorrect answer choice. So this is 60% over here. That was the correct answer. And what was the most popular incorrect, or which are the other popular incorrect answer choices, Atre, if you could also put that out. But let's kind of look at this. Now, whether you got this question right or wrong is one thing, I think. And again, don't congratulate yourself if you've gotten this right just yet. If you've gotten this wrong, don't be disappointed at the same time. I think the key question which is over here is, how did you approach this question? If you got it wrong, what did you get it wrong? What learnings would you take away from there? That's what's there. So 25% was over here. And I think that's pretty much most of it. Okay, so let's kind of visualize this. I'm going to briefly go through this. I actually did a CR session this weekend on assumptions, and if you want to know more about this, you can look at the recording of that. So let's just focus on the conclusion. And one of the key skills when it comes to answering critical reasoning questions correctly is the skill of visualization. As you read, you've got to visualize what's happening over here. And the author says, hey, lowering the price of DVDs and releasing them sooner. So the authors are proposing two things: lower the price of DVDs and release them sooner. That would mitigate piracy's negative effect on film industry's profits. Okay. So when you think about this, the first thing you should have done is the three things that I've got to extract out of this conclusion. And then this simple sentence has three aspects to it. One is the piracy has already impacted profits negatively. How would you really say this? Why? Because there's this word called mitigate, which means that you're trying to figure out the negative impact of something. If you're mitigating the negative effect on film industry's profits, which means the current profits are lower. If the profits if the baseline profit number is $10 million, the current profits maybe are $8 million, because that minus 2 million is because of piracy. Okay. The second thing is we are proposing two things. We should lower the unit prices of DVD. If the DVD costs $10, we are saying let it cost $8 over here. Okay. And the thing that the author is doing is he's making a prediction. It's about a conclusion that's going to happen in the future, that if we lower the prices, as in the industry should be able to recuperate or recoup the lost profits, which means that $2 million, that is that lost profit, it should happen. Okay, so let's kind of also visualize the argument. You've got to go through these steps over here. So what's going on? The first statement over here is the context. Okay, so what the context tells you, and it's the context is given by another person, not the author. It says the pirated DVDs cost less. They are available sooner than the actual DVDs are, or the official DVDs are, and as a result, they reduce profits. Okay, and then, so this is a fact. You're not going to dispute that. It also provides context to this entire argument. Then the author says, hey, because these pirated DVDs are popular, it just shows that, hey, the consumers demand lower prices and faster releases. And then based on this, the author is making this prediction that we talked about in the conclusion, which is lower the unit price, release them sooner, and you will kind of get those profits back. That's what the author is saying. It's a fairly simple argument, and yet this is a hard question on the GMAT. So when you think about how do you approach questions on the GMAT, especially the assumption questions, you've got to pre-think. In fact, when you look at those 700 plus scores, you're going to find about 70% of people who report 700 plus scores, they talk about pre-thinking as a key to helping them in critical reasoning. Okay. We actually pioneered this approach a few years back. Now a few other test prep companies have taken this approach as well. So what's this falsification method, or what's the pre-thinking approach in the falsification question? It just stems on the very definition of what an assumption is. What is an assumption? It's an unstated idea, which means you can't infer it from the argument, that must be true for the conclusion to be valid, which means it must be required for the conclusion to stay valid. Without it, the conclusion will break down. If you translate this statement, what you would infer is that without the assumption, there are places where the conclusion can break down. So in other words, if you've got to figure out what an assumption is, let's figure out in which scenarios does my conclusion break down. And essentially, assumptions would just be that those scenarios do not exist. That's kind of what an assumption would be. If you figure out the scenarios in which the conclusion breaks down, the job of an assumption is to protect the conclusion from breaking down. So an assumption really is those scenarios are not possible in the context of this argument. That's very simple. So how do we find assumptions? We simply understand and visualize the argument and ask this one question: under what circumstances, given the facts in the argument, will the conclusion break down? Okay. And this is something that is the same question regardless of any argument. As long as it's an assumption question, regardless whether it's an argument that deals with two entities, that segments, deals with numbers and quants, regardless whether it's a predictive or a causal argument, it's the same question. And the reason why it's the same question is because it plays on what an assumption is. Okay. So let's now translate this question into the context that we have. So how do we figure out profit that for the film industry? It's a number of units of DVDs sold multiplied by the profit per unit. This is your profit per unit of DVD. Why? Price of DVD minus cost of DVD. Okay. What is the author proposing? The author is proposing that, hey, lower this price and release sooner. Those are the two things that the author is proposing. So what's my falsification question? My falsification question would be, in what scenario will lowering the price of DVDs and actually releasing them sooner not result in increase in profits? Why? Because if profits don't go up, my conclusion, the author has no way to say that the film industry is going to recuperate the profits that it has lost. Okay. In what scenario? One of the scenarios is if more people don't purchase DVDs, if these number of units don't go up. Okay. The assumption is you must have more people purchase DVDs. The second is if your unit profit, which means if this entity over here goes down to such an extent that you can't really compensate for it by increase in units. Okay, so unit profit should not go down to an untenable extent. That's something which is second assumption. And the third thing is if there's releasing these DVDs sooner, if it has an impact on such a huge impact on other revenue streams for film industry. Remember, the conclusion is about the overall profits for film industry, not just the profits from DVDs. So if releasing DVDs has such an impact on profits that this increase of profits over here cannot make up for it. Okay, so what's your assumption? The negative impact should not be so high that it cannot be recovered by increased sales of DVDs. These are the three assumptions that are there. This is pre-thinking. We've not even looked at the answer choices in this case. Okay, so again, look at these three assumptions that we've come up with, and I can probably come up with a couple of more. But again, when you look at this, you get that clarity into as to what's the logic that the author is using and how to go about this. So let's kind of look at answer choice analysis. Choice A was the most popular incorrect answer choice. It's choice A says releasing those legitimate DVDs would not cause any reduction in the other revenue. So then it kind of figures out which other revenue. That's theoretical releases. Now the question that we have to ask is, can it not cause any reduction? The answer is no, it can. It can cause 1, 2, 3, 4, small reduction, as long as that increased sales of DVD can recuperate those profits. That's fine. So this is not must be true. This is a strengthener, but not a must be true which condition. Choice B says some people who would otherwise purchase pirated DVDs would be willing to purchase legitimate DVDs. So essentially, it says that the number of DVDs this number of DVDs sold would go up. Why? Because we know we're going to lower the price, so unit profit is going to be down. It has to be compensated by increased unit sales, and we need more people to buy more DVDs for increased unit sales, and which is why this is must be true criteria. It satisfies that, and it is in line with our pre-thinking as well. Okay. Choice C says the film industry will be able to produce DVDs more cheaply. Do we care about that? No. Again, while if you produce DVDs more cheaply than current, you'd probably increase that unit profit, but is it required for the conclusion to hold true? No, it's not required. It's not must be true. OSD talks about, hey, some current sellers of pirated DVDs will likely discontinue if legitimate DVDs were available at a lower price and were available sooner. Yes, we want more people to buy regular DVDs, but it doesn't mean that we require people to go out of business. Those people who are selling pirated DVDs, probably no. We may require them to kind of lower their unit sales, but we don't require that they go out of business. Okay, and again, whether the current purchasers are aware or not is irrelevant to this entire piece. Again, the piece what I want to really talk about over here is, you saw me go through, and a lot of people think about this and say, hey man, this is a lot of effort. I mean, many of you are thinking, this seems to consume a lot of time. And yes, when you're going to do it for the first time, it's going to consume a lot of time. If you are in that stage one, you will consume a lot of time. But think what you're doing. You're building that ability to visualize. And when you build that ability to visualize, what happens is, as you read more and more arguments, that visualization happens faster. I don't need to really write these things down now. A lot of eGMATers don't need to write these things down now, but when they were in stage one, they actually made that conscious effort to write it down. They spent 3 to 4 minutes per argument. Why? Because they were building that mental capacity. Okay. How do we value units over profits? So some students actually get to the point of say, I want to do the math right. Remember, GMAT critical reasoning is not about math. It is about logic. We don't value units over profit. What we really say is that we know that profits are going to go down. This means the units must go up to compensate for it. That's a minimum requirement. We're not worried about by how much should they go up and so on and so forth. And if you wanted to do a precise math, if you wanted to build an income statement, we would do that. But in critical reasoning, we don't build that income statement over here. But what must be true is that we require that the units go up. Why? Because we know that unit profit is going to go down, and we want the total profits to go up. Okay, and again, You go through the recording of the CR session, you're going to really see many such examples. And this is the same concept that's tested again and again in critical reasoning. So if you were to hit that 90th percentile, and good question, Joshua. I think that's a really great question. A lot of people have that question. When it comes to getting that 90th percentile ability, there are four chasms that you need to, or four gaps that you need to bridge. One is you've got to be able to understand what's the role of each statement in an argument. The second thing you've got to do is you've got to be able to identify what the conclusion is saying, and not just identify, but even visualize various aspects of the conclusion. And for those of you who are eGMAT students, you'd really recognize these are very similar to what we do in SC, where we figure out what are the various aspects that the author wants to communicate. In CR, you actually go a step further. You visualize those aspects. You translate them into numbers sometimes. Again, those visualizations should happen automatically, and building that is an individual step in itself. Okay. Then you've got to learn how to do this pre-thinking. Once you visualize this argument, you've got to ask that falsification question. Now, the thing which is there is, if you do this well, this is very, very easy. But if you don't do this, or if you don't do this, you're going to actually cut yourself a really sorry figure over here. You'd not be able to do this at all. Okay. And then when it comes to answer choice, a lot of people don't even focus on visualizing the answer choice. They really they read the answer choice and say, is this right? Is this wrong? Is this right? Is this wrong? Hey man, just take the answer choice, read it independently, translate and visualize it to really say what the answer choice is saying, then ask that question. If you don't do that, you're going to mark the wrong answer, because that's how those most popular incorrect, or what people say as tempting answer choices, are built around. Okay. So you've got to build this capability one by one, and all of this goes into stage one of learning. Okay. Now you have to do this one step at a time. You can't do all of this together, and which is where I'm going to really show. And now we're kind of getting into data once again. And I love data, by the way, for those of you who don't know me. We're talking about a student who already is at 90th percentile ability, and I'm going to really show what this student did and how much time the student spent to achieve that 90th percentile ability. This is screenshots. These are screenshots of data. And this is a screenshot from our scholar Ranium. Someone who's at 65% accuracy in hard questions over the last 20. This is a three-dimensional chart that we have, is at that 90th percentile ability, according to me. So how much time did the student spend on understanding how to classify statements? This is our first module in critical reasoning, which is the premise and conclusion. You can say this is about 2.5 hours or so over here. You can see these evaluations where we tell a student whether you've done something correctly or incorrectly. And again, each one of these activities, we call them learning activities. This is again in stage one. What you do is you take a learning activity and dig data from every video file. We build technology. It goes into an evaluation engine. It goes through 3 states. Do you need revision? Should you repeat this, or have you done well? And then you get feedback on every activity for each of the 90 activities that we have in critical reasoning. And people who do stage one well do these 90 activities well. Now, they may not do it well in the first go, but they will revise it right then and there, which is where the value of that feedback is. They don't let gaps remain, that is. Okay. Now, this is understanding the conclusion, and you can go into the 4th module, and you can say this is module 4. Why? Because this is actually a screenshot of a free trial. It should say module 3 if you were in the course. But before this, we teach you how to visualize statements, which is our inference module. It probably is the longest module in our course. Why? Because if you can visualize statements, then visualizing arguments is fairly simple. Now, in the first 3 files in critical reasoning, and you can see the amount of time this student has spent. This is not the length of video. He's gone through a couple of these files again to revise them. This is how much time this particular student has done. So we've actually built technology in there. And this is not MPEG-4 video like your YouTube video. This is pure HTML5 video. So every screen you go through, we kind of track data. Through this one, we get about 100 data points in there, which I use to compute this metric for you. Okay, so this is how he learns to visualize conclusion. You can really see argument types, logical gap, 2 entities, segments over here. Now, where do you learn argument structure and pre-thinking? This is the assumption module, and you can see This is where you learn conclusion and argument structure. This is where we kind of get to that next level over here. And then we teach you application and relevant practice. And again, you can see the amount of time just in the assumption module that this guy spent. It might seem a lot, but it is the foundation that you're laying for every argument based question, whether it's evaluate, strengthen, weaken, or logically complete. And once you have the right foundation, those go through very, very smoothly. Okay. And again, you can see evaluations in each one of these. So you've got to build those fundamentals in stage one and across all question types. Okay. And this is the value of data over here. So there's a guy who improved from a 570 to a 740. This guy thought his critical reasoning was really good. Why? Because he taught physics, and people who teach physics, they have a certain kind of ego, and I understand that. But what he said was that language has this way of manipulating your mind, and the GMAT's really good at using language. So if you spend those extra 5 to 10 seconds doing pre-thinking, he got so good at doing pre-thinking that his time to do pre-thinking went down from a minute to 5 to 10 seconds. Okay, so how do you increase that likelihood to 80%? You have the right approach, you learn the right methods. I'm not going to talk about cementing. I'm going to now talk about creating those hyper-specific plans. This is the last part of the seminar. I'm going to take about 10 minutes to do this over here. So what do hyper-specific improvement plans mean? And this is where you are in that stage 3, which is where you're trying to achieve test readiness, and you're going from that 680, 690, 710 to that 740 score. And this is where if you've done things right, data becomes really valuable. And at eGMAT, we love data that's A, organized logically, B, segmented properly, and C, it's sequential, which means we can track your improvement. Why? Because it allows us to prepare these improvement plans, and we call them hyper-specific improvement plans. Okay, so I'm going to take an example of a student over here. So here is a general principle of how you define those hyper-specific improvement plans. The first is you've got to figure out where to focus. Which subsection do I need to improve on? The second is, within that subsection, where do I need to improve, and how can I be certain that if I do this better, if I do comparison and sentence correction better, my SC ability is going to go up? Okay, then you've got to track that improvement, and or you've got to actually work on improving. That is the biggest step, and then you've got to track that improvement. It's very simple. The entire cycle of a hyper specific milestone takes about 2 days if you do it well. 2 days, that is. And you do 3 or 4 of those milestones, you get to that 740 score or higher. Okay, so here is the problem statement that you're trying to figure out. I need to get better at solving this category of questions in this subsection. And to do this, here is how you go about doing this. I'm going to take an example of a student who let me just show this chart over here, and then I'm going to take this example. So this is what I call as a 3D chart. It's on the first screens you see in either a quant scholaranium or verbal scholaranium. And in this chart, you have all questions which are by weighted accuracy. You have all subsections, so you can compare your performance across subsections. You can compare your performance across difficulty levels. You actually choose this. It'll only show your accuracy for hard questions. And then you can add recency to it. You can say, okay, how have I done overall, and what have I done in the past? And doing this allows you to figure out your current state. The 3D chart, it's incredibly complex to code when you think about the database structures that go behind it, especially when you cut across subsections. It's incredibly complex. But we've done this across each subsection multiple times. And the reason we can do this is because we have a dedicated tech team that does this. Okay. So let's kind of look at a student who's currently at a 710. So here's a student who's improved from a 640 to a 710. By the way, this person's target score is 710, but we're going to analyze this mock, and we can say, hey, how the hell can she go from a 710 to a 740? So this is the output of a Sigma X mock screen. You can see your quant score, you can see your verbal score. We ask people what is the score they're expecting, and which is where this person is expecting a Q48, and this person was expecting a V38, and so this student was exactly at where he or she wanted to be. But let's see how we can improve further. So the first thing we're going to really say is, how the hell do I get to a Q50? So this is the actual scholarinium starts for this particular person. Again, we have all questions, we have all attempts, and within quant scholarinium, we have 5 independent subsections, from number properties to advanced topics, or your PNC probability is in advanced topics over here. So the first thing I do is I say, I'm going to choose hard difficulty, and I'm going to choose the last 20. Now, here's why it's interesting. When you look at this over here, you can see that algebra is kind of weak, but you're looking at all questions, but you don't know in what kind of questions am I weak. Why is this accuracy 58%? And the thing that I toggled in, which I'm not showing over here, is that when you go to last 20, you first figure out the recency, and when you toggle hard questions, you really say, okay, clearly this is a problem. This also seems to be somewhat of a problem, but here I'm okay, here I'm okay, here I'm okay. Remember, 65% or higher accuracy in hard still gets you to that 90th percentile or so. So I have a problem in hard questions in algebra. By the way, when we toggle to medium, these accuracies, there was nothing to take. All of them were above 80% for this particular student. But when you toggle to hard, this is where this comes in. Okay. So then you've got to figure out where to improve within algebra. And in each of the subsections, we have what we call as a block level architecture, which means that every subsection has has multiple blocks in there. So within algebra, we have 4 blocks. We have the block 1 is exponents, quadratic equations, and linear equations. Block 2 is sequences and functions. Block 3 is inequalities, and block 4 is absolute value. And you can actually track your abilities at this block level. What this does is it says, if I have to improve in hard difficulty, which block do I need to improve on? Is it block 1 or block 2 or block 3 or block 4? So I go within algebra. You can really see I have all the subsections over here. I've algebra selected. I'm doing block level analysis. Again, the same chart. You can see block 1, block 2, block 3, and block 4, all difficulty level, and I have all questions selected. Clearly, when I have all questions selected, I see this seems to be a problem. And to a certain degree, this also seems to be a problem. But again, I have all difficulty levels selected. So what I do, I follow the same process. I go and select hard questions. And when I select hard questions, clearly, this is my problem. I fix this. Just by fixing this, I can probably get to a Q50. But I also want to make sure I have some concerns that this could also be an issue over here. But first, I need to fix this. And maybe if I need to, I'm going to fix this over here. I mean, think about this in about 10 minutes. If, when data is organized logically, how you can get here. Okay. So that problem statement goes down to, I need to get better at solving hard difficulty questions in algebra. And how do I get better at solving hard difficulty questions in algebra? By getting better in these aspects. Once you know this, it's a 2-day improvement cycle. Okay. Now let's do this for verbal. And for verbal, we follow the same approach. We again look at the same chart, again, all difficulty level, again, all questions over here. And you can see in this case. But I want to look at recency, I want to look at hard. And when I look at last 20, I see critical reasoning has improved, sentence correction, I think seems to be a problem, but RC definitely not a problem. And we have these thresholds. So there's intelligence built into the platform. So you see these thresholds across everywhere. So you don't have to remember these thresholds. Okay. So let's focus into SC and do that block level analysis. Again, same chart, all difficulty level. We are in SC. We're doing that block level analysis over here. And we have all questions. And what do? I again go back to last 20. I again focus on hard. And clearly, this block has a problem. Subject, verb, verbs, pronouns, verb tenses, essentially, I think this is a big problem usually that I see. So everywhere else, it's fine, but I need to focus on verb tenses. I need to go revise the verb tenses module once again, and then need to come back in Scholaranium and solve those questions just from these over here. So my problem statement is, I need to get better at solving hard difficulty questions in SC. Why? How? By getting better in these areas. Essentially, how I form this, formulate this problem statement. It's a 2-day turnaround time. And I come back and confirm my performance in verb tenses by taking a custom quiz in Scholaranium. So you can see as you iterate, just these two iterations would move this student to a 730, 740 fairly easily. And you do that, you kind of get to that score of 730, 740. And again, how do we know this works? Because we've done this through a program called mentorship. This is not something that um, we kind of we didn't think of all of this as out of thin air. This is, a lot of this simplification is an outcome of really conscious effort. So back in 2020, we started a mentorship program. What that mentorship program did was where we had dedicated mentors who worked with every student. And this we worked with them free of charge. So we spent about $1,000 per student, but the students didn't pay anything. They just paid for the eGMAT course. And this was an internal R&D program. And we looked at what did it take for us to get these people to 730 to 740 scores. And this was a program where 80% of the diligent students were successful. Okay, they got to their target scores. And we translated whatever the learnings were from that mentorship program into Scholarium, into the support that we provide today. And the success, the enhanced success that you see is an outcome of that. And some of these are successful students who've actually been there. So there's a guy who scored 760 and went to Harvard, right, all in the first attempt. Here's a student who actually scored 750. I think you've seen his interview on GMAT Club. Again, like the other guy who was a physics guy, he also, I think his name was Arjun. This guy also believed that physics is strong. Why? Because he's from an engineering background, and but data told us physics is not his strength, and we created a hyper-specific improvement plan for him, and that helped him improve. That was one of the many things that helped him improve to that 750 score. Um, Similarly, Rohini, I think DJ did a session with her fairly recently. Again, went through a very, very similar process, was able to get to a 750. Yeah. So again, these easy to follow steps are these hyper specific improvement plans. And you can go watch their stories. You can see their hyper specific improvement plans over there. So, how do you increase the likelihood of getting that 700 plus score to 80%? Start with the right attitude, learn the right methods. Make sure you do cementing. Don't just go into solving questions blindly. Focus on creating those hyper specific improvement plans and then be test ready. We focused on this, not this. 1, 2, and 4 today. If you want to know more about 1, 2, and 4, and 3 and 5, attend the weekend session, the session that we have this weekend. We also have a couple of other sessions this weekend that I'm going to talk about. But, just to summarize, getting to the high GMAT score is really hard, but it's also incredibly rewarding. Why? Because, it not just helps you secure an admit, it also helps you secure scholarships. But very few get there. But if you want to get there, you've got to have the right attitude, execute on those 3 stages of learning, and hit the metrics. If you get there, if you hit those things, yeah, your likelihood goes from 10% to 80% over here. In what subsections do you need to hit those metrics? Each of the 5 subsections. Some of them you may be actually good at naturally, but especially those in which you're not naturally good at. Stage 1 is where most of you falter, especially where you're not good at something. You falter there. Spend time building that ability in stage 1, and then go through these stages in a sequence. That's the shortest path to success. And then, even when you do stage 1 and stage 2 right, you would still not hit 90th percentile. Most people don't. Okay, but then with those hyper specific improvement plans, you can, and that's where data becomes that collated and segmented data becomes incredibly useful. Data is useful all across. Here it's individual activity level data. Here it's collated data. So it's different data organized in different contexts that becomes useful here. Okay, and yes, do this across subsections, and you would get to that 80% likelihood of getting to that 700 plus score. If you need help with those study plans, we have some slots open. I don't know if it's 10, 15, how many, but we have some slots open. So you can book a call. Also, take a look at our incredibly innovative quant course, which has about 1,000 learning paths in it. And it's a really interesting way to study quant. In fact, half of all quant successes reported in May and April were because of this new quant course. Okay, and then finally register for the session this weekend to kind of take this learning to that next level. And and lastly, we have a geometry webinar as well this weekend. Do register for those. I know there's a lot of information that we are throwing at you. Forgive me. We are a company of about 50 people. We do a bunch of things, and again, you don't have to attend everything, but whatever you need to learn, make sure you make those right choices and uh, um, attend those webinars. Okay, in this one, we're going to start from very basics to going through to that 80th percentile ability in certain aspects of geometry over there. So and the aspects are quadrilateral. You will also see the common faltering points, the common process skills that you falter on. With that, continue to be diligent, continue to stay dedicated. Don't watch YouTube while learning, and continue to work hard. You will get there. That GMAT score is really empowering when it comes to your target B schools. Those scholarships, about $200 million worth of scholarships that B schools give out every year. They are life changing for people. Work hard and reap the benefits of the same. Okay, with that, I am done with the session. If you have any question that you would like to ask, I'd be happy to answer those questions at this point in time. Okay. And if there are no questions, then that's wonderful. I mean, I'm glad to have you guys here, and look forward to seeing you on eGMAT.com. Atre, you can actually stop sharing the presentation. Okay. All right, guys. With that, I want to thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you on eGMAT.com. Thank you, and have a wonderful day. Atre, if you could